Oh, ich bin nicht bezahlen. Sei wie mich Hashmatim. Du fällst so frei mein Sidolai. Mit dem du Golas no nehmen. Oh, ich bin nicht bezahlen. Sei wie mich Hashmatim. Du fällst so frei mein Sidolai.
Thank you to Dr. Brightstein for sponsoring tonight's class. You know who Yuri Gagarin is?
Gagarin.
No? You know who he is? Spaceman.
I actually saw him.
You saw him?
Well, I didn't see him personally, but I lived 10 minutes away from his memorial.
Oh. So you saw what's left of him.
Yeah.
So take some challah. Take some challah for dessert. So Gennady has definitely heard this from me before. I've mentioned this before. So in April 12th, 1961, Yuri Gagarin was the first man in space.
Oh, you weren't kidding.
I'm really talking about Yuri Gagarin. You think I just know Russian cosmonauts off the top of my head? This rabbi totally knows Russian cosmonauts and stuff. It's pretty cool. No. So on April 12th, 1961, he became the first person to go into space. I'm just going to close that door. So Khrushchev, when he came back, said Gagarin flew into space, but didn't see any God there. Right? So Khrushchev said, because Gagarin didn't see God, God doesn't exist. And we know this is ridiculous, because God is beyond the physical, and to say that he went into space and he didn't see God doesn't prove anything. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because the same is true with the ancient Greeks, the Greeks. The Ramban says that the Greeks were of the opinion that the only things that exist are what you can perceive with the five senses, which a lot of people share this ideology today. There's a whole group of scientists, I think they're called the materialists. I think it's called materialism, strict materialism maybe, I forgot. But they only believe that there must be no God because you can only perceive what is in front of you and what you can perceive with the senses. Now obviously this is a theory which can't be proven. It's just their a priori assumption. My a priori assumption is that only things which exist that I can see the only things that exist are things that I can perceive with my five senses. Maybe there's something else that I can't perceive. Well, beyond my five senses, that they don't agree with. And the same people who say this view, these atheists, strict materialist atheists, they're the same ones that propose the idea of the multiverse. You guys heard of the multiverse before?
Yes.
So the multiverse is a theory how they get out of first they say there's no God, so how did the universe come into existence with everything? They're bothered by the fact that so many things in the universe fit perfectly, that the gravitational constant and the speed of acceleration of the Big Bang, that if it was a little bit different, then the world, the universe couldn't have come into existence. So how could it be that we just happened to get it right? So, and there's 15 constants like that. It's not just one or two. Speak to a physicist, I'm not so sure. So what do they say? There's really an infinite amount of universes that we can't perceive, and we just happen to be in the lucky one. It's called the multiverse. Now, we can't measure the multiverse because it's in a different dimension, and we can't observe it with our five senses. So on one hand, they're saying we can't prove anything that is beyond the five senses, but on the other hand, they come up with this multiverse thing, which by definition can't be measured with the five senses by any scientific means. So it's a very interesting thing. Now, I'm bringing this up is because Khrushchev, the atheists, and the Greeks were all of one philosophy. The Greeks, they all believed only what I can perceive from my five senses. Now, the Chazal, the rabbis refer to Yavan, the Greeks, as Choshech, as darkness. Now, why were the Greeks called darkness? Now, they weren't Jewish. They had this negative philosophy, but why we call them darkness? Why specifically them versus all of the other nations which have oppressed the Jews over the millennia? So the reason is because the Greeks offered a replacement for Torah. They said, okay, Jews, you guys believe that there's something beyond the physical, that the purpose in life is not just enhancing our physical desires and getting money and pleasure fulfillment and going after your instincts. You people believe that a person has to be selfless and serve God and live for spirituality, and that's beyond the physical. They said, that is incorrect. We are offering a philosophy as a replacement for Torah. And that's why it's called darkness, because anything which is a replacement for Torah ideology is called darkness. you can have someone who learns Torah, but he does sins, right? He has taivas. He loves eating bacon cheeseburgers at Wendy's or spicy chicken sandwiches in the corner of Route 9 and Taylor Mills Road. When he goes home, after every shiur, he has to eat a spicy chicken sandwich with a side of fries, hypothetically, right? And, okay, he has a desire. He knows it's wrong, but his ideology is intact. He's Orthodox, but he's an Orthodox sinner. He's doing something wrong. But when you take an ideology and replace it to Torah and say, no, you don't even have to be doing that. There's no purpose in that. That's choshech. It's worse. It's 1,000,000 times worse to have a bad ideology than it is to do a sin. Someone who just does a sin, and he knows it's a sin, he's going to correct himself. He'll do tshuva. But somebody who tries to warp the Torah and change the Torah into something that it's not, or replace it with something else, that is the worst thing, because then there's no hope. He's not going to replace. That's why you'll find people don't get it. They say, why are so many big rabbis are against heretical movements within Judaism? The Reform movement, the Conservative movement, Open Orthodoxy, all that stuff. Why? What's the big problem? Because what they're doing is they're saying, no, the Torah as it is incorrect, and we're adjusting the Torah to fit with modern day ideals, and they're offering a replacement for Torah. And once you offer a replacement for Torah, that perverts the entire performance of Judaism. It's not just like the Orthodox guy who's doing a sin, and he'll eventually correct himself. It's offering an entire replacement which is totally destructive for Judaism. Now, one of the things that the Greeks were known for is democracy, architecture, art. They had beautiful sculpture. No one denies that. No one denies the beauty that the Greeks contributed to the art world and to philosophy and all of those things. So all of those things are called the humanities. And the theory was that the humanities will make a person more human. The more you appreciate fine art, music, architecture, all of those things, that'll make you into a more human person. Now, my Rosh Yeshiva pointed out, Rav Aaron Feldman, in his book, Eye of the Storm, highly recommend it, page 217, that all of that it does, those are just more refined pleasures, right? A normal American enjoys beer and football. A more refined American may enjoy going to the museum, going to the symphony, the opera. That doesn't make him any more human, that he likes the opera and the symphony. All that does is that makes him more of a refined animal. To a Jew, the definition of humanity is that a man is noble if he devotes himself to interests other than himself. He doesn't just live. An animal lives for two things, his instincts and pleasure fulfillment. That's what an animal does. A human is somebody who doesn't live for his instincts and his pleasure fulfillment, but rather lives for something beyond himself, lives for Hashem, lives for other people, and is selfless. So the humanities is a misnomer. You're not more human for liking art and music, and instead of going to a movie, you go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and you go to an opera, and you go to Lincoln Center. That doesn't make you more human. That just makes you a more refined animal. That's all it does. Someone told me said over from Jackie Mason, so that's all, that he's talking about people like to have a fine wine. They have to develop a taste for a fine wine. You ever see someone who needed to develop a taste for potato chips? Potato chips everyone likes. Other things, refined. You have to have a refined palate. Okay. So that's what so the Jews and the Greeks had this fight. I mean, it was a fight, an ideological fight. The War of Hanukkah was really an ideological war. So you have the Jews on one side who say a human being, the purpose of life is to be spiritual, to devote yourself to Hashem, to be selfless, to live something beyond yourself. And the Greeks saying, on the other hand, no, there's nothing beyond yourself. What you see is what you get. The world is all it is. And that's an inherent difference between Jews and non-Jews. Did you know that one of the lesser-known enactments that the Greeks made is that the Greeks didn't allow the Jews to celebrate Sukkot? What is it about, why Sukkot specifically? Why didn't the Greeks want the Jews to celebrate Sukkot? So on Sukkot, on the first day of the holiday, they brought 13 cows. The next day, they brought 12 cows. The day after, they brought 11 cows. And every day, they brought less cows than the days before. And the reason for this was these cows represented the nations of the world. And the idea was that with the decreasing number of cows on every day of the Yontif, on every day of the holiday of Sukkot, shows the weakening of the power of the nations in their ideology. This ideology that man just lives for himself and not for something greater. The Jews every day would bring lesser cows than the day before to show this weakening of this ideology, to eventually the point where Mashiach comes and everyone recognizes that there's one God, and holy moly, the whole purpose of life and to be a human being is to serve Hashem and not to serve ourselves. So that such an idea was intolerable to the Greeks. They couldn't deal with such an idea. They said, and it's interesting, the Greeks didn't try to kill the Jews. They said, why don't you live like us, right? Be like us. They wanted the Jews to abandon their ideology. That's why it's a spiritual war. Also, we say in Ma'osur, we say, what? Ma'osur is the song that we sing after we light the menorah.
Okay.
So one of the verses goes like this. Yevanim nikbetsu alai, the Greeks rose up against me, azai b'mei chashmanim, in the days of the Hasmoneans, upartsu chomos migdalai, I'm glad my shir reminded you of beer. Awesome. If that's all you took out from tonight, then it's Kedai.
He's more refined.
Right. If he was more refined, he would have brought out whiskey instead of beer. But, so, Ma'osor continues, ufartsu chomos migdalai v'timu kol hashmanim. The Greeks broke down the walls, and they contaminated the oil. Okay, so contaminated the oil we know about. The Greeks contaminated the oil. What does it mean that the Greeks broke down the walls? Anyone have any theories, ideas? You ever hear about this? When did the Greeks break down the walls? What in the world is that talking about? So if you've ever been to the Beis HaMikdash, you'll see that it's actually still, if you can see this wall actually, it's still there, that you had the Beis HaMikdash, and even non-Jews could go on Har Bayis on the Temple Mount. But there was a little wall called the Chil, or the Soreg, that was around the Beis HaMikdash, and there was a sign on it in Greek and in Hebrew that said, only Jews can go beyond this point. Anyone not Jewish caught beyond this point will be killed. It showed the difference between the separation between the Jews and the non-Jews. And this is what we were saying. The Greeks couldn't tolerate this. They couldn't tolerate that the Jewish people had a different ideology, that our lives should be dedicated to spirituality and to Hashem, and when they believed that everything was dedicated to man. So what the Greeks did is they made pirtzas. They broke down this wall of the separation between the Jews and non-Jews, because the Greeks didn't want to kill us. They wanted us to be Greek like them. And you could actually go and you could see the stone in the Israel Museum, and it's written in Greek and in Hebrew about the separation between the Jews and the non-Jews. Now,
Can I have some ginger ale?
it's interesting. Take a course if you want.
Are you okay?
Yeah, it's fine.
Right there, here's the ginger ale.
No, this is better. The course is better than ginger ale.
Wait, can I try some?
Yeah, sure, everyone.
Wait, what is this?
The rabbi said you can have. Just kidding.
What is it?
Anyone listening on YouTube, I'm joking.
What is this? What is this?
Okay. So I wanna just say a couple more things here. I want to tell a little story. Menashe, you want to hear a story?
Yes.
I'm going to tell you a story. I'll tell you a story. What the Yerushalmi says that one of the things the Greeks did on Hanukkah is made the Jews play sports on Shabbos. They made the Jews, because they wanted the Jews to give up the holiness of Shabbos, where we talk. Shabbos is the representation that we believe God created the world, and that there's a spiritual element to the world, and that really our lives should be dedicated to spirituality. So one of the things they did, they wanted to make the Jews desecrate the Shabbos by playing sports. So I was very inspired in, this is a few years ago already. You ever hear of Bidi Deutsch? Bidi Deutsch is an Orthodox woman. She lives in Israel, and she runs marathons. And in 2018, she won the Jerusalem Marathon. I think she actually won it this year also in 2021. And she was working very, very hard to be a marathon runner. And she was very successful. And she qualified for the Olympics. She could have qualified for the Olympics, except that the Olympic trials was on Shabbos. And she decided that Shabbos was more important to her than running in the Olympics. You can imagine what it means to run in the Olympics. You know how good at sports you have to be to go to the Olympics? Yeah. You have to practice your whole life, and you dedicate hours and hours and hours every day. Imagine spending hours of your day spending to be good at something, and then you realize you can't do it because of Shabbos.
Well, how come you can't run on Shabbos?
You're not allowed to. It's a rabbinic enactment, not to run on Shabbos. But I imagine there was more involved. You would have to drive there, all those things. It's also a desecration of God's name.
So, but if you go outside and what is the verses? If you're walking to the shul, you're
allowed to run for a mitzvah on Shabbos, but you're not allowed to run in general. But beyond that, I think the idea is, when the Greeks made the Jews play sports on Shabbos. It wasn't so much that what technical. This is actually a problem that people view things. You could say like, well, what technical law I'm violating? So there's the technical law and there's the whole idea behind it. How is Shabbos supposed to be spent? By getting close to Hashem. Not supposed to be spent playing sports. So this was actually before COVID. So I don't know if COVID changed it, but she did give up that. They did give it up. So she gave it up. She wasn't able to compete on Shabbos, and she gave up her dream of running in the Olympics for Shabbos. Rav Leib Bakst, who was a Rosh Hashiva in Detroit, says if you notice, there's on Purim and Chanukah. Menashe, you know a difference between Purim and Chanukah?
Yeah, because Purim is, they celebrate about like that Haman wanted to kill the Jews, but instead Haman was hung to death.
He was. That was a Purim. Do we read a Megillah on Purim, right? Do we read a Megillah on Chanukah?
We eat the latkes.
We eat the latkes, but we don't read a Megillah, right? So Rav Leib Bakst wanted to know, how come we don't read a Megillah on Chanukah and we read a Megillah on Purim?
And a Haggadah on Pesach.
A Haggadah on Pesach. So he wasn't talking about Pesach, because maybe more he was asking because both Chanukah and Purim are rabbinic holidays. So he wanted to know why on one rabbinic holiday of Purim we read the Megillah, but we don't read the Megillah on Chanukah. So he actually said kind of what you're saying, that Purim, Haman tried to destroy our bodies, and we won in the end. Our physical bodies weren't destroyed. The story's over. Haman got killed, like you said. We wrote a Megillah. The story's done. Let's read the story. However, on Chanukah, Rav Leib Bakst said, the story's not over. Chanukah is the only time we had a group of Jews. They were called Misyavnim. They tried to join with the Greeks because Chanukah the Greeks weren't trying to destroy us physically. They were trying to destroy us spiritually. They were trying to destroy the Jewish religion, saying there's nothing special about being a Jew. The point of life isn't spirituality. God, who's that? Who cares? So this ideology, if you look around, it still exists. There's still Misyavnim. Like we were talking about Choshech, darkness. When you try to replace the Torah with something else, that's called darkness. That's why people are so strong against these movements which try to replace the Torah. People try to take secular values and try to put it into the Torah. If the secular society says abortion is great, no matter what month, no matter the health of the mother, Judaism has to say it too, and people will actually go and twist the Torah and twist the poskim to make it look like the Torah allows things. Why? Just because the Greek culture, the secular culture, says it's okay. That's choshech, that's darkness. The Torah calls certain things a toeva, an abomination. So people will try to prove from the Torah how nowadays it's okay with ridiculous false arguments because secular culture says it's okay. Anytime you see somebody trying to take values from secular culture and putting it into Torah, that's darkness, and that's someone to stay away from. That's why the rabbis are so strongly against these movements. So just to conclude and summarize, the idea of Chanukah is that we should be proud to be Jews, that as Jews, we are dedicated to spirituality, we're dedicated to Hashem, that we believe the purpose of life is to serve God, and not to serve ourselves, is to learn to be selfless, to dedicate our lives to something beyond ourselves. Whereas the secular Greek culture says, no, God isn't important, but we're important, and we have to do whatever we want to be able to improve our own lives and to be successful, and we say that's wrong. That's not what Hashem wants us to live for, and we realize that we're separate from the secular culture, that we have a special mission, and we should be very proud to be Jews. Menashe, you proud to be a Jew?
Yep.
Awesome. Then you're ready for Hanukkah.
Yay.
All right.
I want to share a quick story.
Do it.
So,